May 11th, 2022. So I guess the news is out on inflation. We got, what was it, 8.3% year over year, which is down 0.2 from the last report, from the March report compared to the current April report. The actual incremental was 0.3% for the month. And I think so effectively, it looks as if it's a slight slowdown in inflation. However, inflation above 8% is very bad. And so what we can say is that bad inflation continues without much relief in sight. And so that's kind of the situation on the inflation front. Of course, President Biden yesterday came up with an interesting set of positions on how he's in fighting inflation and warning against the agenda of the ultra MAGA group. Beyond normal MAGA is ultra MAGA. So you want to join up with that group, the ultra MAGA. So anyhow, he's trying to assert that the Republicans are planning on increasing taxes, which is, of course, a kind of a bogus issue, I think, to say the least. And apparently there's something that Rick Scott said about everybody having skin in the game or something that's being interpreted in some way. I don't believe there's any specific proposal, and in fact, Senate Majority Leader McConnell has rejected any such ideas, so it isn't going to happen, and so don't worry about that. If we're worried about anything in this area, it's probably something else. By the way, if you like these videos, please subscribe, give me a like because it helps out with the algorithm. You can click the bell for notifications, and of course, comments are appreciated. So, the thing that we might want to worry about on increasing taxes is remember that the tax increases in order to meet the requirements of the reconciliation thing and the budget plan or whatever. A lot of the personal income tax rates I think are set to expire after 5 years, which I believe is next year. So I think that's correct. In other words, I think it would have to be a bill passed in the next Congress. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the correct situation. And so that's the one thing the Republicans do need to repass and guarantee that it continues. And so the Trump tax cuts, have often been mischaracterized by the Democrats as being tax cuts for the rich, but primarily they're tax cuts for everybody. But primarily a lot of it was focused on the middle class. It was not a big rate cut overall. What did happen at the upper income level, essentially it eliminated the deduction for state and local taxes as an explicit deduction and put a much larger standard deduction out that most people don't even have to file all the detailed deductions. And in fact, I haven't had to either. So because the standard deduction cover is more than my mortgage interest or anything else I could deduct. And so with the new tax plan, which is different than the way it was before. And so, but if you're in a high tax state with high state and local taxes, that there may be some adverse effects here in California, Massachusetts, New York, that kind of areas. Whereas I guess it helps out people in low tax states, and in the middle, the average tax states pretty much break even. And the idea was not to subsidize the states having higher taxes with federal tax cuts. That was I guess it was the idea to try to create pressure to actually cut the taxes there. So at any rate, but that's kind of the situation. I think his whole appearance yesterday as President Biden was kind of a dud, didn't go over too good, and it isn't very effective. And the idea that the way that you're really going to, solve inflation is to release the small amounts of petroleum from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is not been very effective as gas prices continue to go up. And then on the other hand, you have the situation where his other idea is to tax billionaires more. I'm like, but the inflation isn't being driven by consumptuous expending, by billionaires, right? I mean, there's not a lot of massive extravagant spending by billionaires. That's not what's driving inflation. So, in fact, it's probably his crazy 1.9 trillion spending spree, the promoted last year is probably one major contributor. Of course, I do agree that the war in Ukraine and all the anti-Russian policies have driven up oil prices, and that's a factor. And then there's other issues as well. But at any rate, I think that that's a kind of a dud. But anyhow, uh, we have to watch out that they're always up to something like that. And I believe that particular proposal on the billionaires is a particularly odious tax bill because it's basically paying taxes before they're owed, really, paying taxes before you've actually got the cash in hand. And that kind of a policy is always kind of bad. Well, anyway, so that's kind of that. I guess I will address that. On another subject, we have the ongoing protests of the Supreme Court justices, the six conservatives. Even though one of them I don't think actually signed on to the repealing Roe, which is interesting. But at any rate, that's what's happening. And even though apparently it's technically illegal to do it at this time, we can be pretty clear that the Biden Justice Department isn't going to take any action against these protesters. I think we can be pretty sure about that. But I think in the long run, this may very well work out to their disadvantage. I don't see any evidence that the polls have gone in their direction at all since these protests began, and they're generally showing the ugly side of the Democrat personality, I think. Another topic, well, let's get back to, I'll address what happened, of course, 2 days ago, the Putin speech on his, quote, victory day, unquote. Well, it's to celebrate the end of World War II, apparently. It's, well, all the predictions were being made turned out to be completely wrong, as often are. He didn't declare war or expand the conflict or anything on that day or anything of that sort. It was kind of basically a rather routine coverage of the issue. And at any rate, it turns out that he mainly seemed to indicate that he made the right decision and had to start the war when he did. I tend to beg to seriously disagree that it was the right decision. I think, and I kind of think he probably really doesn't think it was the right decision at this point. But what else are you going to say when you're trapped, right? So anyhow, so that's kind of the way that went. The notable thing was that the General Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the Russian military, apparently was not present in his normal role in this parade that they have. And so that raises questions of what really did happen in that artillery barrage in Ukraine a few days ago. Was he actually killed or what? I mean, there's different rumors, that came out at that point. One was that he was killed. Another rumor was that he had already left before the artillery barrage occurred. And a third one was that he was injured in it with a piece of shrapnel to the leg, but it didn't break a bone. So, given he's not there, I'm beginning to wonder if the latter might be true. There's two things to think about it. First of all, the first two don't have a lot of information, really. The third is fairly specific in what it said, that he was there, he was injured, but not fatally, basically. But probably injured enough that he wouldn't be wanting to stand in a car driving in the review of the parade and then walking along with the president after the speech and to the tomb of the unknown soldier and that sort of thing. So given that situation, one might think that, well, perhaps he really was there and got injured. So at any rate, as far as I know, he hasn't been seen in public since the alleged event. So we'll just have to wait and see how that come out. Which does raise the issue of the use of U.S. intelligence to targeting generals and so forth, which kind of leaked out and then it's been denied and then it's kind of been, mulled around. But probably the fact is that probably our intelligence is helping the Ukrainians out in a lot of this targeting. So, and this could end up in some blowback too at some point. But so far there's been no actual retaliatory response based on this. So at any rate, we'll have to wait and see what develops on that. Otherwise, I think that the war has pretty much turned into a bit of a stalemate, like I mentioned in my previous video. And And so we'll have to see, what happens. On the positive side for Ukraine is that their offensive in the direction of Kharkiv has been successful in gaining ground. And meanwhile, the Russians have gained ground in crossing some rivers to the south, and it's causing a little bit of concern there. And so we don't know what the next development is going to be in this whole conflict, but it looks like, for the moment, sort of a stalemate, I think. Although it is an interesting question, what next move the Russians will make. I mean, if a senior military advisor is out of the picture, for instance, that may not be good news, because he may make some move on his own that's less advised, perhaps, as an example. So you have to watch out for those kind of developments. So at any rate, I'll wrap this up for now, and until next time,